More stunning twists of 2024 I couldn't have called on my McFarlane bingo card. McFarlane Toys is making Marvel figures. The catch? Well, they are pre-posed. Or in other words, they're statues, pretty much. Are they worth picking up? And then for me specifically, as a Batman and Spider-Man centric channel, McFarlane Toys has it covered as far as Batman with the DC Multiverse line, kind of picking up on some blueprints or some reissues of the DC Direct line, superpowers with their little small 4-inch kind of stuff, the stuff that's packed in with the page punchers, etc. So, when it comes to Marvel, that Todd himself has a little bit of a history, a tumultuous history to put it mildly, with, it looks like one of the more unprecedented things to arise from 2024 is that he's finally going to tackle Marvel collectibles, except there's a very gargantuan catch, a very Hasbro-sized catch, and that's going to be that those folks over at Marvel Legends are going to be holding on to the rights for legitimate posable 6-inch figures with an iron grip. And it's not going to let up anytime soon. Probably until they die, if I'm going to be completely hyperbolic. Even though there's a little bit of truth rooted in there somehow. So McFarlane saw a little bit of a ways out, a loophole if you will. And he said, he says it, but in my opinion, I feel like the lawyers said it more so than anything else. Is that they pretty much said, what if we take the art that Todd McFarlane made himself, that he drew up for some of the covers when he was over at Marvel, and bring those figures to life, except in a statuesque kind of way, and that's the loophole. You know, they're not posed, they're not articulated, because Hasbro has dibs on that, unfortunately, or somewhat unfortunately. So this is his out, and this is what he's going to be bringing forward towards the table that's Marvel related. And I wanted to really see, especially as a Spider-Man fan, if these are worth picking up, because we've already seen a plethora of McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse figures reviews on the channels. I feel like it's only fair to finally tackle some of this brand new product, especially if it's going to be entailing my man, Spider-Man. And here, during a Target run, I managed to come across 2 of the 1/10, I believe. So this is a little bit on the smaller scale, 1/10 scale statues or pre-post figures of the Spider-Man line that they're issuing out, along with a couple of other Marvel characters, specifically Deadpool, Captain America, etc. But this is specifically the 1/10 line, retailing for $30. And on the left, you have a mass retailer widespread release of Spider-Man from issue number 6 that was drawn up by McFarlane, of course. But then you have a different version over here, which is a gold label, as you can kind of attest right there from the gold labeling in the corner. And that's because this is specifically a Target exclusive that is inspired by issue number 38. And that's the thing, the reason why we have so many of these issues here kind of being showcased in the corner, and that's because he wanted to take those covers and just blow them up in 3D styling. So taking the 2D, bringing it to the 3D, keeping it statues so that there's no legal troubles coming his way. And that's pretty much what we got going on right here. Before we get to the statues themselves though, I did want to kind of remark a little bit on one of the things that is admittedly a bit attractive about this wave or this line, and that's going to be the packaging. Admittedly, it's pretty collectible. I really do like the window packaging. I do like that since these are statues, the windows themselves are going to be a little bit on the larger side, so you don't necessarily have too much of that compact nature that the traditional DC Multiverse stuff has, or even some of the other stuff with other waves, or like some of the Spawn stuff, the Warhammer stuff. So the statues themselves are the star of the show, but you still have an awful lot of the Marvel branding, Spider-Man branding, a little bit of comic book paneling happening in the background there with the black kind of aesthetic here on the sides, but then to kind of pronounce the comic book issues that they're inspired by, here in the corner you have the red background. Of course, like I mentioned before, with the Target exclusive, you're going to have the gold label there in the corner to make sure that you know that first and foremost. The sides are a little bit on the generic sides, it's more of that marveling, but still, it's pretty crazy. It still kind of boggles my mind just a tinge to see that you have the McFarlane Toys logo at the very top, Spider-Man in the middle, and then Marvel towards the bottom. The fact that you have all these brandings and labels all on the same panel of the box is kind of surreal, you have to admit. Though, to be fair, a little bit of that Marvel branding does go a little too crazy when it comes to like the bottom, and most especially at the top, you have yet another logo right there. And then when you get towards the back, it just looks like an extension of what you had going on in the front, where you have, again, a slightly bigger representation of that comic that it's inspired by. So you have, of course, the two different variations of the cover, Marvel, McFarlane Toys, still kind of surreal, but now we get, it's almost like McFarlane's kind of battling it out for the most logos. You have a little bit more of Marvel right there, but then you have McFarlane Toys in both corners right there with a little bit of the, actually, I have a legit P.O. box right there. I wonder if I should kind of send him, or I should send him in some ideas for some inspiration of some ideas like for 1/6 scale figures. Who knows? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'll reach out and talk to them to see if maybe I can score an interview or do something like that. But anyways, you have, I think, here a bit of a bigger showcase of that black background where you see a little bit of the paneling that's inspired from some of those McFarlane covers, except again it's utilized as a form of background with black all over. But to me, my favorite part of the entire part of the packaging for this new wave of McFarlane statues that are inspired by Marvel covers would have to be the actual blow-ups of the covers themselves here on the side. So the entire, I guess, their right, my left side paneling of the box itself is pretty much overtaken by the cover art itself from the issue that this statue is lifted from. I love this. I love it when packaging just decides to utilize the majority of the real estate and actually just kind of encompass the entire thing and give us like almost a one-to-one. I know it's not quite there, but almost a one-to-one replica of the cover art, as if it's like a actual cover of the issue ripped out from the staple and planted onto the side of the box. And I can easily see someone, maybe even myself, if this wave kind of tickles my fancy, and kind of build a wall of just the side of the boxes. So you take all the boxes of each of the figures. Of course, it's going to be a little problematic to kind of mix and match 1/10 with 1/6 when we finally get to the 1/6 statues, especially if they're, like I said, inspired by Spider-Man, if there's any of those Green Goblin or Venom ones that were showcased during San Diego Comic-Con recently. But once you kind of know how to tetrify it all together, I can easily see someone, maybe even myself, build an entire wall out of these damn things and just have it all be the covers that McFarlane drew up inspired by these figures and just kind of stack them all together Funko style, but just have this be the showcase and kind of develop like this shrine or this wall of nothing but just these covers. And obviously, if you couldn't already tell, this is my favorite part of the box. It's very profound, it's very colorful. The paint, the actual printing that they utilize for these covers is very beautiful. It's actually kind of, I don't want to say laminated, but it's got a glossier finish than the rest of the box, and it just looks very pristine and nice. And I will do my best possible job to make sure that none of these covers on the side of the box get tampered with, especially during the unboxing portion of the process, which we're finally going to get to right now, if I know how to snap. And here they are out of the box, complete with dioramas and everything. And here's what I'll objectively say about these statues, is that they're definitely premium quality. That's the one thing that you could practically not take away from McFarlane never developing any form of statue, specifically if he's harkening back to his Marvel roots. Because for those of you who don't know, McFarlane started with statues. I remember seeing them in Toys R Us aisles from time to time, but I never really attributed it to the name McFarlane. I know I saw them in person in the store. Specifically around Toys R Us's much more adult aisle where they had some of the NECA alien stuff, Predator stuff, but I know that I saw some of the sports figures or sports statues that McFarlane would generate. And so he's got probably the strongest and much more long-running history with pre-post figures, or in other words, statues. And so you know that the quality is going to be there. You know that he's not going to be delivering on half-assed statues. So to see that the Marvel name, specifically a character like Spider-Man, is treated very accurately when it comes to a really well-done PVC statue, then you're going to be in good hands. So objectively, these are really well-made statues as far as the quality of the PVC plastic utilized. They're not resin, so they're nothing high caliber. Otherwise, we would be looking at a much girthier price point. For $30, the PVC is actually pretty solid and pretty robust. You can see right here that the quality is pretty nice. And overall, I want to say between 80 to 85, 90% of the overall ratio of the paint applications is done really, really effectively. I love the saturation of the colors hues on either one, whether it be the much more bubbly looking classic look of the Target exclusive or the much more deeper blue and red that the Todd McFarlane designed Spider-Man over on the left here is sporting. And the overall webbing and specifically the eyes are probably my favorite part, as well as the spider symbols on both the front and the back. But the reason why I say 80 to 85% is because sadly it is that Todd McFarlane statue that I noted a couple of little areas here and there where the webbing is kind of overlapping or the red is kind of bleeding through beyond the point where it's supposed to be, whether it be a little bit on the sleeves. On the back, I can see a little bit of the stencil for the webbing kind of crossing from where the red is to where the blue is. And so yeah, I didn't oversee that. That didn't escape my gaze. And poetically, both of these figures have some weird inconsistencies with the blue, specifically around the hip and leg area. Both of them where they have like certain areas where the suit is supposed to be creasing, so to speak. A little bit of the blue is kind of, like I said, going from different hues and kind of stretching or having a few of highlight issues, specifically the Todd McFarlane one when it comes to the left leg. You can see a little bit of blue that's kind of splotching a little bit. So yeah, overall the paint is pretty vibrant and the quality of the PVC plastic itself is pretty nice, but I do think that maybe if a few extra weeks in the kiln, so to speak, would have probably prevented a few of these QC issues, because when they announced these guys, I was expecting them to be a little further out. So to see that I came across them pretty easily and pretty quickly in my local Target, I would say that probably the casualty of such readiness or such quickness was in fact some of the paint applications. But at least I'm happy to report how well the sculpting of the actual body proportions, the musculature, and then overall, like I said, being able to replicate the accurate versions of Spidey, whether it be the much more accurately proportioned classic Spidey on the right over here with the right amount of musculature and weight and overall dimensions. Granted, still not a fan of the web wings on either one. Literally both of them are sporting the web wings, so I'm like, god damn it. I really don't like the web wings on Spidey. I'm probably in the minority with that when it comes to classic, nostalgic-based Spidey. I just do not like the web wings, so it's a little detrimental to myself that both of these Spidey statues sport them. But it kind of makes sense on the Spidey, on the classic Spidey here on the Target exclusive. But for the Todd McFarlane, I kind of really wish that he would have omitted that. But at least the actual accuracy to that cover art with the very weird anatomical proportions really are able to measure up to that. However, this leads me to my next point, and that's the subjective one, which is really going to depend on the collector which one they're going to vibe for, because obviously you have the classic Spidey that probably speaks to an awful lot of people who collected comic books in the 60s and 70s, and that this is definitely going to be that Spider-Man for you, whereas this is going to be the much more stylized, exaggerated, because it looks cool Todd McFarlane. So objectively, the plastic and the paint is mostly good, but which one is going to kind of Spidey sense for you is definitely going to be in the eye of the beholder, because some people gravitate towards this Spidey as being their definitive Spidey, and then others are going to do the vice versa. And who knows, there's probably going to be a very acute amount of people in the middle of that Venn diagram which are going to vie for both. And I really do respect that the basis that these guys are propped on are also kind of reflective of those specific versions of Spidey. They both sport this kind of rectangular display, which is overall structured and molded almost identically, except with a couple of little nuanced difference. Of course, the color scheming of the base itself is a little different from one to the other. I'll notice that the gray on the Todd McFarlane one is a little darker versus the lighter shade or the much more bluish shade on the classic Spidey. And then in front, you got a nameplate for the Spider-Man logo, but of course, it's different. For the classic Spidey, he's got, of course, the classic red with the amazing prefix right above it. And then over here, you got the blue for the much more amazing Spider-Man run when Todd McFarlane was over at Marvel making that comic run. So it's pretty cool that they're kind of paying attention to that. And also still indicative of that era, you have different little caricatures or little details to kind of breathe a little bit of extra life to the statue in the form of some extra three-dimensional applications to the base. You have some nondescript rubble that is really well done as far as paint and sculpting on the Todd McFarlane one, but then you have what appears to be details resembling that of a rooftop over on the classic Spidey, complete with a little chimney right there, as well as some rubble and brick painted accurately with the brown right there. So overall, really nice little display pieces, but once again, they are 1/10 scale, so they're going to be a little bit on the smaller side, kind of meant to be something that you have more so on like a bookshelf or a mantelpiece as opposed to being your centerpiece. I would say you would want to reserve that space for the 1/6 scale, but is this enough to take someone who's not exactly a statue collector to the forefront of then collecting the statues? My direct response immediately from pulling them out of the package and inspecting the figures, it kind of absorbing the visual fidelity of either figure when it comes to, like I said, the paint apps, the sculpting, the actual presence of them. I gotta be honest, I want to say no, they still look pretty cool, but I have to keep that $30 price point. And initially, I didn't think that they were $30 worth. Maybe if they were like 20, at most 25, I could probably stretch a little bit like Mr. Fantastic, since he's all the rage right now with the Fantastic Four news. But at 30, it starts to kind of push the envelope a little bit. Until I discovered one little detail that does kind of placate certain things. As I pulled them away from these diorama pieces, which I'll cover in a second here specifically because they do happen to be a bit on the controversial side when it comes to these new Marvel statues that McFarlane is putting out, I then started to really mess around with the statue itself. Again, I needed to get a feel for the plastic and the PVC utilized, and then I come to realize that the rod back here is made out of this die-cast metal, which is pretty quality, feels pretty hefty, weighs down the statue, and feels pretty firm in hand, and kind of, like I said, amplifies the quality of the overall statue. So the $30 price point, even though I still think it's a little much, it wasn't necessarily generating the sting that it was doing so before. And then, as I kind of started to, like I said, mess around with the statue, you'll notice right there, it started to rotate, and I thought to myself, yo, is it possible that maybe McFarlane was a little sneak and decided to incorporate at least one, maybe 2 points of articulation within the statue to at least kind of make it a little fun, make it a little dynamic? Maybe I'm able to move his head or one of the legs or one of the feet or maybe the web shooting hand. I don't know. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I'm sorry. Spoilers, no, that didn't happen. There was no way that he will still be able to do that without getting the Marvel Legends folks to then have a red dot appear on his chest, all right? That's simply just not going to happen. However, you could almost argue that he generated a separate loophole, and that's going to be the removable aspect of the statue itself from the base. You can technically remove, as you kind of saw in some prior B-roll here, be able to remove the statue not only from the metal rod right here that's holding it in place, so that way you're able to get a much more firm grip on the statue and kind of get a feel for it and whatnot, but also you're able to remove the base from the metal rod. To me, what it kind of does, or at least kind of gives me the idea of, is that not only can you technically rotate either the base or the statue on their respective axis, or axis. Is it axis or axis? I don't know what it is. But you can technically rotate the base horizontally or rotate the statue in place vertically. So if you don't want it to be in this very distinct pose where it's just vertical like so, kind of like in a comic, you can technically kind of veer it off a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, just depending on your preference. So that's kind of cool. But then to take it a step further, the next thing that popped into my brain was the fact that you can technically now swap the different bases with the different figures. So if you want the classic Spidey to then sport the rubble-based, rubble-centric base that the Todd McFarlane one uses and vice versa, you can now do so as well. And then, of course, this also means that other Spidey figures or Spider-related figures like the Green Goblin or the Venom that's going to be in the 1/10 scale released later down the line, you can swap them in between. Now, granted, they might have a little bit of that nameplating that's going to make it a little inaccurate, but at least you'll have the advantage of being able to swap out for the rubble, swap out for the rooftop, etc. So I'm like, all right, this is a little neat. And plus, it lends to the thing that Todd himself was kind of pitching, which is that you're technically able to kind of pose the statues with each other to make it look like maybe they're fighting each other or they're dodging each other's hits or fights or punches, etc. So you can technically take the statue right here, kind of rotate it a little bit off to the left, so whenever that Venom kind of comes across, you can kind of put him underneath right here. You know, there's at least a little bit of playability, even though there's still statues at the end of the day. But they are statues from McFarlane Toys nonetheless, so you know that means that he's going to try to at least still add the things that make McFarlane collectibles. They're the McFarlane collectibles that you know. One of which is, of course, the staple trading card, which comes in each statue. That I personally really like, that it's very distinct from the classic DC Multiverse cards that come bundled with his DC figures. So it's cool that the aesthetic is a little different, the color scheming is a little different. To me, what I really do like about these trading cards is that he took that cover that you saw multiple times on the box, but then kind of shrunk it down to those trading card. And there's just something very collectible about that I really do appreciate. However, the other thing he included is, of course, these diorama displays that you can have in each of these statue collectibles. And you can see right here that they are very thematic to whichever statue is inside the box. So for the Todd McFarlane, you have a very stylized, very watercolor looking backdrop of New York, whereas the classic 1960s expired Target exclusive gold label, you're gonna have this much more plain, and that's not to say that it's a bad thing, but just much more antiquated looking backdrop of the New York skyline, a la the 1960s comics. However, this is where we do get into some sketchy territory, because recently there was a post online. I can't remember if it was definitely in the Reddit, the McFarlane Toys subreddit, but I believe it was also spread on over to the action figure subreddit, and then somehow it made its way over to Twitter, which is where I discovered it and kind of followed down the rabbit hole. But some accusations, I guess you could say, with some very distinct founding evidence have been made towards these backdrops that indicate that McFarlane Toys, maybe not Todd himself, but simply just someone who works at McFarlane Toys, someone who's on the design team or on the business end, I don't know who, but someone over at McFarlane Toys made the decision to have these background dioramas sport artwork that is kind of, sort of, potentially AI generated. And I know that that's a very blasphemous word when it comes to the industry of art and being able to, and design, graphic design, the collectible market, etc. Because you want genuine work made by a human person to be included in something like this. That way they get their artwork showcased, they get their talents being put out there specifically for a very big property like Spiderman, and being kind of spearheaded by someone like McFarlane Toys. So when I heard this, I kind of inspected these backgrounds, and like I said, they have very distinct qualities to them. I gotta be perfectly honest, I didn't see anything that gave me the notion that it was AI generated on the classic Target exclusive gold label that you have over here on the right. So I scanned it through, and I personally don't see anything that's very distinctive to me that stands out as like, oh, yep, that's AI generated or anything like that. However, it's this one that I did see. Maybe it's because of the watercolor effect or something with the style, or as far as the perspective going down the line with the sunset in the background. But after I kind of gazed at the artwork and thought it was cool initially at first, I did notice that there's some buildings that as they get a little higher, they start to either bleed in with the skyline, or they flat out just kind of start to wipe away and disappear. And then there's even one building over there that kind of resembles a little bit of the Empire State Building that stops, gets cut through by the cloud, and then picks up again. And I'm like, okay, that's a little sketchy. That's a little sus, as the kids like to say. So yeah, there's a little bit of an inclination that makes me think that maybe this one was. I can't speak for this one, but... And of course, there's the kind of ripple effect that if this one does sport evidence or details that kind of hints at it being AI generated, how can I possibly rule this one out? Even though I don't see it, there's still the possibility that maybe the AI is getting just that good that I just don't see it. And at the end of the day, behind closed doors, I don't know that this was in fact AI generated. And the same goes for the other statues that are available right now, whether it be the Deadpool one or the Wolverine, the brown Wolverine that's going to be coming later, or the 1/6 scale Spider-Man that's kind of making its rounds right now. And that is a little troubling, to say the least, because let's say that the AI tool is taking work that was used with permission. Like McFarlane Toys actually spoke to someone and said, hey, can we use this and kind of blend it together using AI tools, but we're still going to compensate you, we're still going to credit you. Then okay, but if there was no permission asked, that's definitely when we get into like some legal trouble. And I personally would feel a little uncomfortable having these up on my shelf, knowing that there is some nefarious purpose with the background there. So I'm hoping for the best. I'm hoping that that's not the case with these backgrounds, because they do add a little bit of extra life to the statues. Even though if I was to get more statues, I would say that the statues themselves would speak for in themselves, and I could probably do away without the dioramas. That way they can kind of pose with each other, be up on the shelf isolated, so that way the center focal piece or the focal strength of that shelf is going to be the statues themselves. But notice I said if I do collect more of these, because right now I'm still not, like the kids like to say, I'm still not moved. I'm still not super inclined. I didn't walk away from this experience going, yep, I see the light now. I'm collecting statues from here on out. Unfortunately, as good as some of these statues are, and like I said, when you start to get into the subjective nature of things, I prefer this one because it has that much more stylized, unique look to Spider-Man that was influenced by Todd McFarlane. But at $30 a piece, it does start to kind of weigh them down a little bit, and not necessarily in the good way like that Metal Rod likes to do with the quality, because despite having some really solid foundation for, again, the technical aspects of the statue as far as the quality of the PVC and the mostly good paint applications. I say mostly because, like I said, there's still a couple blemishes here and there, a little bit better solid nature to the bases. Maybe they could have made it like a little bit of a podium design as opposed to being very thin and flat. And then, of course, the controversial nature of these dioramas that I really wish wasn't there. If it wasn't for that, maybe I would have been moved to recommend these. But at $30, I would say maybe wait for a sale, or just simply take the combined price point of either of these two on the smaller scale and then opt in for the bigger ones, because then it's going to make a much bigger impact on your display. Maybe I'll be moved enough to get the 1/6 scale because it's got that iconic cover display pose that Spider-Man is known for. When you think of Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man, you think of that Spidey shooting out the web as opposed to this one. And that one I am still technically looking forward to right now, and I do have on pre-order, but I'm still a little apprehensive, and none of these figures or pre-post figures were able to really push me forward in the camp of collecting statues, even with a Target exclusive like the Golden Era Spidey here on the right. And therefore, I'll be giving these statues a combined score of a 6 out of 10. They're okay, and if you're a die-hard Todd McFarlane Spidey fan, definitely pick them up. But for anyone who was kind of interested in seeing what McFarlane can do with the Marvel property without, like I said, being able to do articulated figures like I would love him to be able to do, then these are still something that you can practically wait on later down the line. But that's a take coming from someone who doesn't really collect statues all that much. So how many of you do collect statues, whether it be Spidey, Batman, or any other character in between? I want to really get a feel, a gauge for how many of you not only collect the articulated stuff, but also the statue stuff that's very premium quality. It's affixed to a certain pose, but you know it's gonna look good striking that pose. And maybe you have some that are sporting mixed media, so they have a little bit of cloth, a little bit of wool. I don't know. I really want to be able to see the light a little bit with statues, and I'm hoping that I can get a few bits of information from the comment section. While you're down there, hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video, thumbs down if you did not. A massive thank you to our executive producers at the level 2 tier, Tom Bowling. And as always, stay humble. I'll see you guys later.